Hi and welcome to part 4 of a beginner tutorial series of how to create a pop song using Reaper. So far we've been learning how to navigate ourselves around Reaper and have recorded both live and virtual instruments through MIDI. In this video we will explore mixing, including altering program commands, using the pan function, signal chain, and adding effects to the vocal track. Before we begin, have a listen to a variety of songs. Listen to the mixing. We all learn by copying others. So take your favourite song, which is the most similar to yours, and listen to how it is mixed. We'll use that song in order to create the mixing in your own. Let's begin with program commands. There are two ways to access the program commands, which are also envelopes. Firstly, zoom into the timeline by clicking on the top plus button. So zoom in up here. This will allow extra menu options to appear. Next, click on this little triangular shaped button that is for your track envelopes automation. This will show all of your menu items. There are two main tools to focus on here, volume and pan. And with MIDI, you'll also need to look at velocity. For now, click on pan. You can choose for this to affect the track before any effects are added or after. Choose before. So we're going to do pan pre-effects. So this means that it affects the track before any other effects are added. Panning allows you to place each instrument in its own place across the audio spectrum. Think of it like you are viewing a live orchestra. Now the instruments are spread across the stage. They're not all trying to occupy the exact same space on stage. So when you're mixing, you need to ensure that each instrument is given its own little place across the spectrum, and that's what panning allows you to do. You can bring instruments to the forefront and bring them back through automation, or you can set them in their place right from the start and affect how they sound in terms of being at the back or the front through other effects such as reverb. Generally speaking, singers, lead singers, are normally placed in the middle center. Drums at the back or to the left or right hard panned. Other instruments kind of in the middle. But it completely depends on what effect you want. And that's going to go for a lot of the effects that we add. It totally depends on what sound you want to create with your piece of music. And having your reference track handy can actually help you decide where to place these instruments. So have a listen to your reference track. See if you can analyze where the instruments are actually placed, whether they're on the left of your hearing or on the right, whether they sound like they're at the forefront or in the center. You can hear them across both sides. Have a think about it, analyze it, and then get back into Reaper. The biggest thing to be aware of here is that when there's more than one instrument playing at the same time, you need to ensure that they're not both in the exact same space. So give everyone their own little percentage. Otherwise, what will happen is the two instruments will actually struggle to be heard. They'll start cancelling each other out. One thing to be aware of when assigning the pan position is that generally when things are to the extreme left or right, they will stand out more. They won't sit in the middle and be quite warm. So if you want something to really stand out, pan it hard left or right. If you want something, for example, strings to be a little bit warmer, put it closer to the middle, but obviously not at the center because you want your vocals to be at the center. So as you're assigning the pan position, make sure you're aware of that. So I've gone back in and I've moved my strings now to being at 11%. Let's have a quick listen. Getting me forward despite debates. notice that my bass guitar here, I haven't changed that yet. So let's go into our track envelopes and add a pan position. And we might move the bass guitar. We want it to be fairly noticeable. We've got piano hard left. Let's put the bass guitar hard right. At about 70 on the master mix. And then on your pan here, do the exact same thing. Bring it down to hard right at 70%. Volume changes can be made in the same way. Have a listen to your reference song and make the volume of each instrument similar through the envelope tool. You may not have to do this for all of your instruments, as you can affect the master mix down here, and when you go to render the entire song, you can choose to just take the master mix, which is this one down here. So you can either choose to add volume here to each of the instruments or not. The only time that it really affects it is normally just in the MIDI. So make your selections and make sure you have a listen back to the entire song. We'll go back to the start to listen to the start. And the verse. So I've decided that I will change some of the volume settings in the string section, especially in the chorus, to bolster it a little, to fill it all out. So I'll make those selections now. So in the volume program commands, if you actually highlight the section that you'd like to alter and then right click on the spot where you'd like to make the change, and you can actually create a new point. The shortcut here is Shift and click. You can actually create another point here, Shift and click, and then you can change the volume there and bring it up. And then so the more points that you actually create, the more it will change. And let's have a listen to it. And it does actually get quite a lot louder, so we don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. I just want it to be a little bit louder in the chorus to fill it out. And I'll do the same. I'll bring the chorus here up as well. I won't bring the chorus back here down, I'll bring the chorus up here up. Once you've made your selections for each of the live instruments and all of your MIDI instruments in terms of panning and volume, Let's look at how we can make those MIDI instruments sound a little more human. Double click on the drum MIDI track. On the bottom left, click on the drop-down menu. These are all of your program commands in a different form. So you need to select velocity, which on mine is already selected. And you can see these colored bars here. They show how hard the notes are being hit, or the attack of each of the notes. Green is less attack, yellow more, and red really hard hitting. Imagine yourself playing a drum kit, and if you can, jump on a real kit and try and play your rhythm. You wouldn't hit every single beat with the same intensity, so why have your MIDI instruments being hit with all the same intensity? To change the velocity of one note, left click on the colored bars underneath the note. This will select all of the drum kit instruments. If you'd like to change just one, just click up here on the piano roll rather than down here, and then you can affect just that one. So thinking about which parts of the drum kit are going to be hit harder, generally speaking, the start of each bar is going to be hit harder than the rest. So if you want to just put in a basic outline, you can actually select all of the rest of the bar and just bring it down slightly. And let's just solo that drum kit so that we can hear the changes that we are making by clicking on the S down here. Now already you can hear that the snare drum is quite hard, so left click on the snare drum and then shift to select the other snare drum, and then just bring that down slightly more. Let's have a listen now. And the bass drum down here is quite hard as well. It's a little bit nicer. All of this is just experimentation, so thinking about your reference track, continue to make changes across your drum timeline, constantly listening back to the results. Now for the effects. There are two main groups of effects. Processors that consist of compressors, limiters, and EQ, and effects that add extra noise or wetness to a track, such as reverbs, delays, choruses, and other modulation. When adding effects, you have a vast array of options for where the effect takes effect. In terms of the signal chain, you can have the effect come before any other effects take place, in the middle, or at the end. And one way of looking at it is, if you can get your hands on an analog board, it's the way it is represented digitally, and it's from top to bottom. So the things at the top are the things that are happening straight away. The things at the bottom are the things that happen after the sound's gone through everything else. It's really important to get your signal chain correct. When looking at all of this, it can be really, really overwhelming. What's a compressor? What's a limiter? Do I need that on this instrument? How do I EQ? What do I do? It's really important to have your reference track close by and really listen to what's being put on those tracks, but to also assign yourself a set of rules, some boundaries to follow as you go through this process. So as you're a beginner in using Reaper, and as well as probably in recording music in general, and because I'm sticking to the basics, I'm going to be following a set of really, really basic rules. So in terms of placing effects on tracks, there are some that we will put directly on the track, and there are some that we'll put on a second track, kind of like a duplicate of the original track. This duplicate track, we are not going to copy and paste the track onto a new track. We're actually going to create what's known as a bus or a send track. And it's like a ghost track where the signal has copied exactly what was there before and it's sending the signal to the bus track. We're going to create that bus track before any other effects take place. So it's going to be at the very start. On the bus track, we are going to only place effects that add extra noise to a track. So we're going to create a wet track as that bus track. On the original track will be all of your extra effects, such as compression and EQ. A bus is exactly like what it sounds. Just like a bus transports people from one place to another, a bus in terms of audio is going to transport signal from one place to another. And that's all that the word bus means. In Reaper, it's called a send. So when and where are you sending that signal? So let's start by adding some effects to the vocal track. Let's start by creating that second bus track. So what you want to do is just click on the vocal track. It's my vocals. Click on the vocal track and we're going to create the second track underneath it. So by clicking on the vocals and going to track and clicking on insert track, or holding down Control and T, insert a new track. Call this one vocal wet. Then what you want to do is you need to tell the vocals to send the information to this vocal wet track. So click on the I/O button down here. This is where it'll show the routing. And you want to add a new send, and you're going to be sending that new send down to the vocal wet track. So add a new send to track 9 vocal wet. Here is where you tell it when you want it to take effect. So you've got 3 options: post fader, pre-fader, post effects, and pre-effects. We want it before anything else, so we want it right at the start of the signal chain. So we're going to click on pre-effects. Okay, now that you've done that, click out. Next, we start adding effects to this wet track. We start by adding effects to the wet track first, because they are the ones that add extra noise to a track. And once you have added extra noise, the compression, the EQ, all of the other processing effects will change based on how much wetness you have. So Reaper comes with its own set of effects. The first one that we're going to be looking at is Reverb. So click on the effects button on the wet channel. Next, click on VST and select Reverb, which is Reaper's version of Reverb. Click OK. You can access a couple of presets or mix the wet and dry yourself. Once you've made a selection, solo both the original and the bus tracks and slowly mix the wet track in with the original. Let's solo those out now. Where are we? Solo and solo. The other thing that you can do is actually make a selection of one part of the song. I'm just going to select from the verse to the chorus, and you can actually loop that by clicking the loop button down here. So there's a couple of different presets. You got Sweet Verbo and Bad Crunch. So we're going to go try Sweet Verbo. Here we've got a graphic representation of what's happening. Down here we've got an echo generator and a reverb generator. Shows the width and the pan. So let's have a listen. Ripples in a stream I pushed on. So it's very echoey. So what you want to do is pull down how loud the wet track is and bring it slowly in.
Stubbornness resides in our will to achieve, though our strides don't always match. Like ripples in a stream I've pushed off.
Let's try Bad Crunch.
Stubbornness resides in our will to achieve, though our strides don't always match.
You can see straight away in the graphic representation that it's quite a more dramatic change to create that crunchier effect. Experiment, make your selection, slowly work in the wet track, and then listen to the entire track as a whole. Okay, now let's add a compressor to the original track. The reason why we're adding a compressor is so that the vocal track remains consistent throughout. We don't want a really hard compressor, but we do want to maintain that consistency. So let's click on the FX button on the original vocals track, and then click on VST and add the compressor Raycomp. Now here you have a variety of presets again that you can add. So solo out those tracks, both the wet and the dry, and hit play.
Many memories through the years, is to look up to you.
And try and change some of these vocals.
Looking different ways you never quite grasped how to just be.
Test out using auto makeup.
Guiding me forward despite debates, our wall still stood. Tales of youth never understood, but your strength I share. Like ripples in a stream I pushed on.
Okay, so make your selections, experiment, and make sure you're listening back to it regularly. Let's add EQ to the vocal track as well by clicking the effects button on the original track and clicking on add. And because we're adding EQ, we want to select re-EQ. Okay, you're going to experiment with the presets again by listening to it as you change. There's a lot of stock standards here for a variety of instruments. There's some clear vocals, full vocals here. There's male vocals. I'm fairly certain there's female vocals, intimate female vocal. This will change the EQ settings, so which frequencies are boosted and which frequencies aren't. So let's solo out those tracks again.
Many memories through the years, is to look up to you.
You can see that it's scooping off the bass here and boosting some of the other
Looking
notes.
different ways you never quite grasped how to just be.
Full vocals.
Guiding me forward despite debates, our wall still stood.
Clear vocals.
Tales of youth never understood, but your strength I share. Our will to achieve, though our strides don't always match.
Okay, so experiment with the different presets as well as with the moving the dot markers around, and then make sure you're constantly listening to it. Once you're happy with your selections, listen to your track and continue to make changes until you're happy with the overall sound. Constantly go back to your reference track and make sure that you're trying to make it the same style as theirs. You may need to head back into the program commands and change some of the volume markers. I noticed that with my vocals I might need to change that slightly. You might also need to change the volume, the panning, and really keep juggling all of those effects. As we add effects to the other instruments, you'll need to keep going between each of the instruments, constantly changing things, constantly going between each of the effects and constantly juggling until you've got a result that you're happy with. And at the end of the day, don't forget to save your project. Join me next time as we continue to add effects to the rest of the instruments, mix the final project, and export to a variety of file types.